Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem, founder and editor-in-chief of All Israel News and our sister website, All Arab News. Honored to be joined today by an Israeli Arab, a commentator, a journalist, I think an activist too. We'll let him describe that for himself. Yoseph Haddad. Yoseph, first of all, I'll introduce you in a moment. Just first of all, thank you so much for doing your first interview with us at All Israel News.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure here. And before I am a commentator, before I am a journalist, I am a social activist. I'm the CEO of the organization Together Vouch For Each Other, which is an Arab-Israeli NGO. That the whole idea of this organization is to bridge gaps between Jews and Arabs and bring the Arab-Israeli society closer to the Israeli society and take care of our problem. Not the Palestinians, not Gaza, not Ramallah, not Jenin, but Nazareth, Shfa'amer, Rahat, and obviously the rest of the cities. Israel, that's what we care about.
Well, you're a fascinating person, and I will be honest, even though I'm I'm an Oleh Chadash, a new immigrant, just less than 7 years. And so I'm still learning the currents and the cross currents of our society. And while I've been building lots of wonderful relationships within the Israeli Arab community, especially among evangelicals, the pastors, ministry leaders, that's my world as an evangelical from a Jewish side. But I have to admit, I wasn't aware that you were, for example, writing columns for Israel Hayom, the biggest newspaper here in Israel. But I caught that you were being announced as a new correspondent / anchor with I-24, the Israeli news channel. And that's what made me start thinking, you have an interesting voice. And I really wanted to get to know you and introduce you to our readers and viewers all over the world, Yoseph, because I think that for those outside, but who love Israel and care about her future, they almost exclusively know about Israel's Jewish community. Right? Yeah. Very rarely do they have a voice that they can process what is happening in the Israeli Arab community. Yeah. And you are a unique voice in that. So I want you to take another moment to explain more about why do you call it Vouch For Each Other? That's an interesting name. And then we'll get into the issues of, like, especially coming up to this election. Yeah. You had some interesting comments, but we'll get to that in a moment. Tell me more. Who is vouching for each other?
Okay, so first of all, it's very important to understand that my voice is unique only because I say it higher and I speak it out loud. Okay. Like me, there is a lot, and it's very important for me to any of the viewers here to realize that and to understand that I'm not unique. I am only unique just because I speak out loud. Because once we started this organization, Vouch For Each Other, and Vouch For Each Other actually it comes from the Hebrew arivim, which if you read it without thinking about it too much, it could be also Aravim. Arivim is vouch, Aravim is Arabs. And when you say together, vouch for each other, it's together, ביחד ערבים זה לזה, or ביחד ערבים זה לזה. Together we are Arabs to each other. Okay. So there's a kind of a nice, playing with the words to say that. But the whole idea of this name actually came from my commander, a hero, Roy Klein, his name. He was killed during the Second Lebanon War. But his story is unique because Roy Klein decided to jump on a grenade to save his crew. So this is the definition, by the way, of a hero. And a year before the war was in 2006 in Lebanon. A year before the war, I was with him. We went into an operation on the border between Israel and Lebanon. And while you do steakhouse, there is a lot of the dead time until some action happens, and we found ourselves talking to each other. And only in the IDF you would see a scene like this where an Arab and a settler with yarmulke, we're talking about our cultures, about about our religions and all the traditions. And suddenly Roy turns to me and he says, Haddad, listen carefully. There's a Jewish sentence, but I don't want you to take it to the religious part of it, but I want you to take it to the social part of it, which says all Israel vouch for each other. And the religious thing is that to keep the mitzvot outside in the Golan, outside of Israel. He said to me, I don't care about it in this conversation. In this conversation, I wanted to take it to the social place. I had no idea that this sentence, all Israel cares, vouch for each other. I had no idea that years later, I would be using this sentence to name my organization, Together Vouch for Each Other. But once we started this organization, I said, wow, that's the name for sure.
That's fascinating. So we do need a little bit of your backstory, right? Because very few Israeli Arab citizens choose to serve, because they don't have to serve, but choose to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. So let's first note that what's the percentage of Arabs who are citizens of Israel of the total population of Israel? Let's start there.
Okay. Well, first of all, when I started back in 2003, I was among the few. You can literally count it. Today, we're talking about just 3 weeks ago, there was an article about it saying that over 1,000 Israeli Arabs, not Druze and not Bedouin, served as fighters in the IDF. This is a huge number, but there is something that not a lot of people are talking about it, and it's called the National Service. And the National Service, it is an alternative service to the country, where you can serve the country and at the same time serve the community, your community, in hospitals, schools. You be paramedics, medics, in the ambulances, fire departments, police departments. And get this, 10 years ago, there were only 200 volunteers from the Arab society yearly. 10 years later, we're talking in 2021, we're talking more than 5,500 Israeli Arabs volunteering to serve in the national service yearly, which means, Joel, that in 10 years, you will see tens of thousands of Israeli Arabs serve the country. This is huge. This is amazing. This is actually what I call it, the ticket to a united Israeli society. And I love it. And you're going on more and more.
Yeah, no, I know. You're a preacher. I can see that you're ready to go. So giving those who are outside the country some context, right? So roughly close to 25% of the citizens of Israel are not Jewish, right?
Yes.
They mostly Arab, but there are some other ethnic groups,
21%,
Jews and other. 21%. Okay, so you add the other components, you get to roughly a quarter. So 21% are Arab, but you're right. There has been, while they're not Palestinian, they're not part of the Palestinian Authority, they're actually citizens. You can vote, you can run for parliament, you can serve in any capacity up to and including the Supreme Court. We have had Israeli Arabs serving on, even I believe at one point as I don't know if it was the Chief Justice, but it was one of the head of the Elections Oversight Committee.
Yeah.
So many people outside of Israel think of Arabs here as treated legally. Now, I'm not talking about cultural. There's still many cultural challenges, but in terms of legally, that there's an apartheid culture here, that Israeli Arabs have no standing in the community. Talk about that and why you see this dynamic changing, because then we'll get to the politics of this election. Something is changing, and you seem to have your finger on this pulse.
First of all, let's go back to the definition. Israeli Arabs, are we Palestinians living in Israel? Are we Israeli 48, Arabs 48? Because some of the countries and people call us like we are a tag or something. And I'm saying it because a few months ago, the Democratic Institute did a survey asking the Israeli Arabs, or the Israeli who live in, or the Arabs who live in Israel, ask them, define yourself. And they gave them 4 options: either as Israelis, either as Israeli Arabs, or just as Arabs, or as Palestinians. Only 9% define themselves as Palestinian. More than 74% define themselves Israeli Arabs. Why? What is the reason? What's happening in Israel in terms of us, the Israeli Arabs? First of all, we need to understand and realize that the young generation is different from the older generation. Most of the Arab generation that was born in the 80s and then the 90s and the 2000s, we didn't pass what the older generation had. Not the Independence War, not the Sixth Day, not the Yom Kippur. Up until the late 70s, early 80s, you had the military roadblocks within in Israel. And for us, the young generation, we don't know these things. We were born to a complete different reality from our older generation. Because of that, and because of the social media, and because of the fact that Israel is not apartheid, and Israel is giving full rights to all its citizens. Yes, there is social challenges. I'm not saying there isn't. Sure. And there is things that we need to correct. I'm not going to say that Israel is perfect. You're not going to hear me say that.
Right.
But from what the world, the media, and certain people in power say and talk about Israel to the reality, there's a huge difference. And that's why we couldn't stand this. And that's why we needed to do something about it as Israeli Arabs. That's why in our organization, we go and speak about it. We tell the truth and show the facts, but we say the whole truth. Because when someone criticizes Israel and we believe that he's right, we're not, we don't lie and we don't run away from it. We actually address that. And we say how we can fix it, but together, not running to places that we don't want to go, but together we can fix it.
So this is fascinating because I think that on the one hand, while Israel legally treats Israeli Arabs the same as Israeli Jews in terms of funding for Israeli cities and Arab cities and towns, for development, for education, it's not the same. It's not treated equally.
It's not the same.
But there's also that's a serious problem. Then there's of course attitudes also. But one of the arguments that I've been hearing you make, and it's intrigued me because I agree with you, but even if I didn't, I would ask you about it, is that, again, people outside of the country would say, oh, they don't even realize that there are Arabs who can vote, that you can start your own party, that you can serve in the Knesset. And in fact, one of the largest factions in the Knesset, in the parliament here, with 15 seats, are Arab Israelis. And they make up what's called the Joint Arab List, a number of different Arab parties. However, there seems to be a growing frustration, certainly with you, but I think with other Arabs also saying this group voted against the peace treaties, the normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Sudan, with Morocco. That seems odd, right? That you'd have Israeli Arab Knesset members against peace with these Arab countries, and they were always refused to be part of the government, always refused to be, so it's hard to advocate for the money and the development and all the other things if you're basically have a bloc that's large, but absolutely against almost everything that Israel does. You're trying to make the argument that this has to change.
Yes.
What's your case, and do you see change coming?
One of my most viewed article, it was when I wrote that it doesn't matter if the joint list with 15 seats or 5 seats, it's the same thing. And it's the same thing because time after time, Knesset after Knesset, they sit down in the opposition with zero power and getting only secondary committees in the Knesset, not really affecting. If they can do something, it's because they close a deal with people from, for instance, the Likud or any other party in the coalition. But it's a deal that costs also us a lot. So eventually, what happened here is we're seeing that the Israeli Arabs right now are, make them pay for their mistakes. There are 15 seats, but in the recent polls, we're talking about between 8 to 9 seats. That's huge. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who are had enough from the joint list, and they say this time we're not going to vote. And
so you're basically talking about roughly a third of the list is going to
more than that. More than a third. A third is 5 seats we're talking about, and each seat is between 30 to roughly 35,000 votes. It's hundreds of thousands of votes actually.
Are they not going to vote, or are they voting for Zionist parties?
No, most of them are not going to vote. Okay. And it's because of lack of a real alternative in the Israeli Arab society. I can tell you that we are working on it. We're working on it. We want to have the best idea, the best choice would be an Arab Israeli political party that will come and say, we don't care about what's happening in Palestine and Gaza and whatever. We care about us. By the way, most of the Israeli Arabs, I love to give the statistics and the polls, the surveys. A survey that was made about what is the main issues in the Israeli Arab population that concern us. 4% only answered the conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. More than
4%.
4%. That's it. That came last place. 4% only said that the most important thing is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The first thing it was with 52% is the security, personal security, and confident and fighting crimes and illegal weapons. And
because people need to understand that there is a lot of crime, really rampant crime rates in a number of the Arab communities, and there's a feeling that the Israeli government is not doing enough. It's not. I mean, but I'm also the feeling is, hey, listen, we have crime, but how come there's not more being done to create law and order?
I always say it needs to tango. You need to tango. That's why I'm not only saying that Israel is the government is the problem. Yes, the blame is also on the government, but the blame is also on our leaders that they do nothing. They do nothing. And we are seeing that. That's why they're paying right now with more than a third of their power. This is the payment for their lack of possibility to do anything.
Okay, 2 last questions, but I want to pick up this conversation. We need to do much more than this. We need to do more to educate people all over the world who love Israel, particularly evangelicals. That's our primary audience, but it's not our only audience. But there's a lot of interest, and we need to understand this, and especially with an Israeli Arab in Nazareth, this is a good conversation. But 2 questions. Number 1, we are seeing in this, we have this never-ending set of elections here. In this round, it seems to me, as a new immigrant, that there are more mainstream Israeli parties putting Israeli Arabs on their lists and trying to even do more campaigning among the Israeli Arab community. A, is that accurate? B, is it effective? That's one set of questions, and I'm going to ask you one more in a moment.
I think you've already seen my expression, my face expression, to see that I'm very disappointed. I'm very disappointed because the Jewish Israeli political parties had a huge opportunity to do a difference, but they failed big time and they disappointed big time. And I will explain shortly. We're talking about 6 to 8 seats that the joint list is losing. And those people, those voters, are looking for a home to vote for. I would have expected, and I've advocated for it in my columns, in my videos, in my lectures, everywhere, and activities to the Jewish political parties, the Israeli Jewish political parties. If you want the Arab votes, you need to respect and show respect, and you need to put people in a realistic, respectable place. Now, what happened? The Likud party put a place on the 39 seat. For now, all their polls are between 28 to 29 seats, which means in the fourth, I don't think it's even realistic. Yamina, Bennett, 0. Sa'ar, 26. Yair Lapid, 26. Seat number 26. When all their polls are 11, 13, and 19. And even go to the Labour Party. The Labour Party, They had an opportunity to do something very good, and ended up putting someone who she's it's even worse than the joint list itself. Because for those who don't know, Ibtisam Marani, number 7 in the Labour Party, she said about the Memorial Day for the IDF soldiers, fallen IDF soldiers, during when you hear the siren goes on, she said, this was my most wonderful 2 minutes. I mean, this is, and the Labour Party calls themselves a Zionist party. And the only political party that did something about this, it was Meretz, when they put someone in the 4th and the 5th place. Now, both of them are respectable candidates, but the problem is that one, Meretz always in the opposition, and they barely even pass to be in the Knesset. And second, they are like sort of like the Jewish replica of the joint list. So there's not, like the Israeli Arabs, they say, we will not find our solution in Meretz, because Meretz is obviously the same thing as the joint list. We voted for the joint list. So what happened here, Joel, is that we didn't get nothing from this round. From the 4th election, unfortunately, the Israeli Arabs, those who want to vote, they don't, and don't want to vote for the joint list, unfortunately, they don't have a home to vote for, and I'm one of them.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one last question, but it's 2 sections. In the polling that you're looking at, you see willingness for these Arab voters to shift. You're not convinced, so I'm sort of checking what you've said. You're not seeing, however, an Israeli Jewish party being serious about welcoming in them. So does that lead to you starting a political party, or do you see other people that are getting ready to form, led by Arabs? Maybe they have Jewish people on their team also, but getting ready for if we go into a 5th round of elections. Yeah. God forbid on that side, but I mean, is it time? And do you think we're going to see an actual serious effort? And are you going to be part of it?
All right, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a secret about those 4th elections. I was offered to be, I got multiple offers to be in one of the biggest political parties that they are in this 4th election. I declined for the sole reason that the offer wasn't serious. The offer was, I had the kind of a feeling that they just want the Arab in the political party, with no intention of really work for the Israeli Arabs, with no intention for making a plan and campaign and budget for the Israeli Arabs. And that's why from that reason, I've decided not to go. And also I decided not to go because we are really doing a great job as an NGO. We're doing a really amazing job. And I always say, as long as I think that we are doing a great job in the NGO department and as a social activist, better than a politician, I will never go to politics. I will stay in this position. Once I realize, and there is a place, whether if it's us or a Jewish political party, that will be a place for us, and we will be able to do more than what we do as an NGO, I will definitely consider it. But for the Israeli Arab society, to have an alternative Israeli Arab society, we must understand this doesn't happen in one day. I mean, not even in 1 year or 5 years. It takes time. We must remember, we are talking about, and now I'm talking specifically about the Israeli Arabs, we're talking about 73, 4 years of roots that were, in the grounds of a way of thinking. And suddenly, together, Vouch For Each Other comes, and we change that thinking. But you can't change 70 years in 1 or 2 years. Sure. It takes time. The wheels are moving forward, but they're moving forward slowly, which is understandable. We expected that. But we are seeing that our society is moving forward towards a different and change of ideas in terms of what the older generation put for us. And we understand that this is not the future. It's not the future.
And how old are you, Yoseph, if you don't mind me asking? How old are you?
35.
35. 35. So you've got some time. I'll just close with this thought, because again, we need to talk about this on a more regular basis. But I would say you're right that 70 plus years, things take time to change. But I think what I sense in you and what I'm seeing in others also is there's a level of urgency that's growing because the actual problems facing the Israeli Arab communities are growing. The pandemic has made all the problems worse. The Joint List is doing nothing helpful. So I think and this was the season. This was the election for one or two or three Israeli Zionist Jewish parties to say, let's make a top 5, 10, something really. And the fact that it didn't happen doesn't mean it won't, but it does mean that probably
it's not a one-time chance.
That it's time. That it's time for at least a party that has a serious shot, but probably led by Arabs that are also inclusive of the Jews. I that's my sense of it. But I don't want to go to a fifth round. So maybe that would give you more time to you and your team to be playing and building over the longer haul. But I don't see a way forward without a serious party forming fairly soon and beginning to attract people, even if the elections are 2, 3, 4 years off. I'll leave you the last word.
I want to tell you about something. I want to actually get out of a little bit of politics, and I want to address something that you said just now. And you talked about the pandemic with, extending all the problems and making it deeper. But I want to tell you that God had other plans. And I'm saying this because this pandemic, it is a terrible, terrible pandemic. And I pray that we will finish with this as soon as possible. And, Israel is leading the vaccination. We become a vaccination nation. So we are on the way to get out of it with God's help, inshallah. But also, when I say that God has its plans, because this pandemic showed the whole world, but mostly showed the Israeli society, that because of the corona pandemic, we've seen the real cooperation and friendship between Israeli Arabs and the Israeli Jews here in Israel. Because when you see the Jewish doctors taking care of Arab patients and the Arab doctors taking care of Jewish patients, and you see how they're together, I mean, you've seen with eyewitnesses how our real life should be as a united Israeli society, both Israeli Arabs, Jewish Israelis living together here in a Israeli society. And obviously, all well and best well for everyone. Stay healthy. Go vaccinated when you can, and if it's possible.
I'm vaccinated.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
And yeah. So with this note and tone of changing a little bit from the politics, because politics. We have a good future here, but we need to work harder on it to make it like that.
I hear you, and I think that a dynamic that we haven't discussed is that. You're from an Arab Christian background, so then that'll be a whole other set of issues because the majority of the minority of the Israeli Arabs are from a Muslim background, so there have to be voices of a combination, right? But yeah, it'd be interesting if as this movement grows, if you start to see prominent doctors and business leaders and others emerge saying it's time. We need a voice. And because I think that unlike putting together a party at the last second and quickly loading it up, that it may take some time and building trust and voices to start coming onto a proposed list so people can start saying, well, what do I think about that? But anyway, thank you. This has been a fascinating conversation. And as an evangelical, I am really trying to build relationships all across the society. And I hope that All Israel News is one of those places that we're covering stories that people on the outside should be aware of, but they may not be hearing from regular mainstream sources. And honestly, this is very inside baseball, as we would say in America. And yet it's important because Israel is so attacked as being a racist nation, an apartheid nation. Those are lies, but they have elements of truth, and we need to fight what's wrong in our society, and we need to raise up voices and give you people like yourself and others more time, more opportunity to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, rather than acting like it's not a story or that nobody's interested. But so thank you, Yoseph. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to sitting with you and having some good baklava and coffee and whatever soon.
Inshallah.
Thank you. God bless you. And thank you for being willing to share with us today on All Israel News.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much.